The Founders. So called as they are the hearthstone of the Dominion and are responsible for its creation, one of the biggest threats to Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets, and a political powerhouse of the Gamma Quadrant. The Dominion is a society based on fear so ancient that they no longer recognise it in themselves. Hi, Rick here with the Cultural Index for the far-off race of Changelings from Star Trek, also known as the Founders. A first distinction to make: the species has no true name, or at least one that is not known to others. Just as no individual within their society has a personal name, Founders is the name they adopted as the organisation that created the Dominion, while Changelings was a term that they were assigned in their history. Eons ago, a frustratingly vague timescale, they were a humanoid race aware of their origin as beings whose development was altered by a progenitor, a shape-shifting being that imbued the species with its own properties. Although this may just be a lie that they tell to placate curious monoforms. Either through genetic manipulation or natural evolution, this species develops the ability to change their form, fundamentally altering whatever society they once had and instigating a whole new way of life. They classify as genderless, metamorphic beings capable of adopting a myriad of forms. Essentially, they are an organic fluid compound of dense enzymes and bioorganic elements that are maintained by an ambient morphogenic matrix. Their ability to assume other shapes is through a conscious mental process, although they lack a central nervous system and other internal organs. They maintain their essence in every shape. The transformations are triggered by enzymes that alter the density, composition and entire makeup of the fluid. They have the philosophy that to be an object is to understand an object. This translates into spending entire days in a form to truly experience it, sitting in a corner as a rock, mimicking animals and their lives. These efforts are how they understand the universe around them, and they are not limited to just solid matter. Experienced changelings can also become mists, vapours, and even fire. This often leads to them accumulating a variety of objects that have piqued their interests, often creating sanctuaries to study them. Their time in a single form is limited to around 16 hours, after which a shapeshifter will have to revert to their gelatinous state for at least an hour to regenerate their cellular makeup. In this state, they are capable of linking with another or several other changelings and sharing their consciousness, thoughts and experience. This sensation is often described as, well, it's indescribable to solids, as they have no frame of reference for this joining. It comes as naturally to them as breathing. In fact, the majority of changelings don't exist outside of their Great Link for any extended period of time. The species seems to be functionally immortal in terms of natural lifespans, although they do procreate. As an infant, however, they possess no sentience. A fresh and new drop formed from the link with no mind of its own, a changeling will not grow or develop at all unless exposed to environmental factors or nurtured by the link. They can exist in this state, simply an organic puddle with barely signs of life, as we understand, for years, decades, even before they are prompted to grow. Responding to stimulus, the infant changeling develops its sentience and mass with experience, eventually forming an identity. When raised apart from the Great Link, these individual changelings develop a strong independence from their species, although they are still drawn to their own kind. This has a great deal to do with never having experienced the Great Link, as they do not know any different, but once exposed to it, often realise that this is closer to their natural state than maintaining an individual identity. This sharing of thought is more than a linking of minds, and more of a single consciousness that can then separate into individual personalities and leads to little conflict among the species. A point of pride among them was that no shapeshifter has ever killed another. Except once, and a penalty was exacted by locking Odo's morphogenic matrix into one form, rendering him humanoid. A curious species, they were driven to learn, ever since their earliest times as a spacefaring culture. Unfortunately, other species they encountered became suspicious of them, even fearful because of their abilities to hide, thinking them naturally duplicitous. This led to many a purge and hunt at their expense, and the changelings were often driven from worlds, beaten or killed. Naturally, after repeated incidents, this led them to become embittered and secretive. After all, treat someone like a monster long enough, and they become that monster. However, while developing a low opinion of monoforms, coining the term solids to describe their limited existence, the changelings began to realise that the only way they would be safe was if they could control the threat, and thus they became the Founders. Practicing advanced genetic engineering, the Founders located several primitive races and altered their genome to make them subservient to the changelings, including the Vorta and the jem'hadar. In order to control their servitors, they wrote into the DNA differential treatment of the changeling race, and even went so far as to evolve the jem'hadar to lack an enzyme they needed to survive. The Founders became the sole producers of this chemical, named Ketracel White, and thus the Dominion was born. Now operating with the Vorta as their proxies and the jem'hadar as their defenders, the Founders retreated to a new homeworld, a barely M-class world on which they settled their new Great Link. From here they could hide and control their puppets to negotiate on their behalf, seldom setting foot, wing or sludgy puddle, beyond their home. The Vorta, designed to be agreeable and diplomatic on the surface, were just as callous as their masters on the inside, and they were given leadership over the jem'hadar with finer points of command managed by their own disciplined societies. The imbued safeguards of acquiescing to the changelings' every whim developed into a reverence of the Founders from their proxy races, and then soon the architects of these species adopted the moniker of gods. Ultimately, it's a title that they themselves don't care for, but will use to enforce their will. In their dealings with the other races, they began to need to employ violence and military might where diplomacy failed. Jaded as they had become, they saw no problem with even genocide, as they considered solids to be a limited existence, not of equal worth to their own lives, and therefore disposable. Alongside this callous approach, they developed a strong desire for order and control, a trait seen in even those raised away from the link, suggesting a species-wide predisposition. Still, they remained curious of the outside world over their 10,000 years of seclusion, and while their existence faded into myth and legend, they sent out 100 newborn changelings to experience life beyond their walls. Despite the large military, the Dominion will often prefer to settle matters through negotiation or diplomacy, but will not hesitate when resorting to combat. They tolerated Starfleet's presence in the Gamma Quadrant for long enough until they considered them a rival, then declared their intention to fire on any Alpha Quadrant vessel they encountered. Being a superpower on par with the Federation, in many ways being a dark reflection, this was no idle threat. The eroding of morality on its founders' part allowed for them to use overwhelming force when trade failed, and any technology or science they wanted, they got. By the time of the Dominion War in 2373, the totalitarian power had dominated numerous other races through fear of eradication, using bioweapons and aggressive trade. Of course, despite all this leverage that the Dominion wielded, it was still a culture founded on fear. The most crucial part of the Dominion, its most sacred duty, was to protect the Founders. Entire military wings and populaces were disposable if it meant protecting one of their own. Yet the changelings' natural powers also made them the perfect infiltrators, so they were often sent out to manipulate foreign governments from the shadows, observe and report back. A single changeling had the benefit of the knowledge of the entire race to pull from if they had access to the link, and a near limitless lifespan gave them a long-term view of the galaxy, enacting plans that often took years to come to fruition. They had a lot of experience in empire building and destroying, and could play other powers against themselves in a way that those prejudiced monoforms once feared possible eons ago. They are ironically so solid and unyielding in their views and culture that they do not seem to possess any art, furniture, performance, or anything enriching beyond their experience in shapeshifting, not even gifting the Vorta with the ability to appreciate art. Culturally, they're a stagnant species, so stifled by the fear of the outside that they no longer grow from exposure to it. Not that they don't have reason to be afraid with their history of hostile rebuttal, but nonetheless their monolithic society will never change, just grow unless fundamentally their viewpoint can be altered. Thanks for watching this index on the Changeling founders of the Dominion. I have skipped over the Jem'hadar and Vorta specifically here, as they have their own subculture, which would be worth exploring in an independent video. Speaking of which, over on the community tab you can find the vote for the next episode of the Cultural Index, and I was thinking then, why not choose from those two as the subject of the next index to continue the Dominion flavour? Thanks again for watching, and until the next video, I've been Rick, and I'll see you later on Certifiably in game. Goodbye.